Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Morgan Bachman, and I'm the Operations Coordinator for Circular Action Alliance Colorado. Thank you for joining us today for our Education and Outreach webinar. To kick us off while folks are joining, we have several members of the CAA team here today. So I'm going to hand it over to them to briefly introduce themselves, and we'll begin with Rachel. Rachel?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Zarowin, and I am the Communications Manager for Circular Action Alliance Colorado. And what that means is that I'm leading education and outreach here in the state. And with that, I am going to actually pause recording here for just a second and start recording again, just to make sure we have what we need. And then just a moment, and I'll hand it off to Eric Hybor after that. Okay, I think we're good to go. Eric Hybor, off to you.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. Eric Hybor here, project manager with the CAA Colorado team. Happy to support today's webinar. I'm excited to hear what questions you have. So with that, I will pass it off to Eric Dennis.
Hi all, I'm Eric Dennis. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach for the national program, and we'll be passing it back off to Morgan.
Thanks, all. Okay, so I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping details. As you can see, this webinar is specifically focused on education and outreach under Colorado's Producer Responsibility Program. So if for any reason you are not interested in this topic, or perhaps you're representing a producer, we value your time, so feel free to protect it and exit the webinar. We don't take offense. We are recording this session, so it's going to be posted to the CAA website in the next few business days, and also sent out in an email following to all registrants. We will offer an opportunity at the end to address questions. So throughout the course of this webinar, if you have questions, please go ahead and submit them through the Q&A feature, which should be down on your bottom Zoom bar. We'll respond to as many questions as we can following the presentation. And then lastly, please bear in mind that everything we're discussing here today is proposed. CAA Colorado has submitted a program plan for approval, but the plan is not yet approved. So we'll get started with our first slide. Next, please, Rachel. Thank you. A quick legal disclaimer. As you may realize from these introductions, the Circular Action Alliance staff on this call are not lawyers. Anything presented today is not intended to be legal advice, and it is strictly informational. Next slide, please. Also, a quick antitrust reminder, please be mindful of what you share during the Q&A session of today's webinar, and please refrain from disclosing any business sensitive information. Thank you. And our agenda for today. So I'm going to go cover a bit more background information, and then I'm going to turn this over to Rachel for the E&O topics. So that includes what is education and outreach under producer responsibility, how payments for local governments work, and different ways communities can choose to engage in the program. And then Eric H. will help moderate the Q&A portion at the end. Thank you. Okay, so to make sure we're all on the same page here, let's just chat a bit about producer responsibility. The basic policy approach is that producers of the paper and packaging products that hopefully end up in your recycling bin at home are funding the recycling system. So the responsibility for management of these materials shifts from residents and governments to the producers that supply products into the state of Colorado. So since this approach looks at the beginning of the supply chain, this creates some positive incentives for packaging design, particularly with making covered products more readily recyclable in your bin at home. For more information on the Colorado law and like an EPR 101 style session, our team hosted a webinar in July that hopefully one of my colleagues can go ahead and post in the chat. That is a great way to kind of catch up on the basics if you are new here. Next slide, please. Great. So what role does Circular Action Alliance play in the system? CAA is a producer responsibility organization, or PRO. First and foremost, we assist producers in complying with the law. So to do that, we have submitted a program plan to manage covered products. That program plan must ultimately be approved by CDPHE, or Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. That is our state regulator here in Colorado. I believe Rachel is actually going to give you an update in just a few moments regarding the status of the plan, so stay tuned for that. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then Colorado is not alone in pursuing paper and packaging EPR. Oregon kicked off their program earlier this year. Colorado is actually second in terms of the implementation timeline, and then closely followed by California. You can see we have various other states on the horizon: Minnesota, Maryland, Washington, Illinois, Maine. Those states have either already selected CAA as their pro, or are on the horizon in terms of their implementation. They've maybe conducted a needs assessment already, which is a beginning step of this process. Next slide. Great, and I'll end here on sort of a bigger picture note. The brands you see listed on this slide are our founding members of Circular Action Alliance. These are, of course, highly recognizable names in the food, beverage, consumer goods, and retail industries. Our founders, along with nearly now 3,400 other registered and potentially obligated producers in Colorado, will either partially or fully fund the collection, sortation, and processing of all packaging and paper they supply into the state of Colorado. So if you apply for reimbursement through CAA's program, such as an E&O payment, which is what we're going to be talking about today, it's all in support of reducing waste and recycling more. Thank you all. With that, I will hand it over to Rachel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Morgan. I appreciate it. So that was a really great introduction to producer responsibility overall. And before we start to talk education outreach, I want to get a little bit more specific about producer responsibility in Colorado. So I posted that 101 recording that you can watch if you have folks on your team who need just kind of an overview of how it works. The gist is that in Colorado, producers fully fund the system. Like Morgan said, that's not the case in all states, but in Colorado, they fully fund it. So if we start in the little square that says producers pay annual dues, they are teeing up to pay dues starting in January. And what those dues will be used for is to provide recycling at no cost to covered entities, which in our case is residents. So the focus of today is going to be about providing no cost recycling to residents. Do know that starting in 2028, more entities will receive recycling at no cost thanks to producer responsibility. So they're called non-residential covered entities. Some of those examples are schools, government buildings, public places, as well as small business and hospitality. Again, not the focus of today, but do know that there's more to come over time when it comes to producer responsibility. So if we go back to the slide on your screen, all the things in yellow are the things that receive system funding. So like Morgan said, the dues that are being paid from those producers fund all these things in yellow. Education and outreach, which we're talking about today, the function of collecting recycling at your home or at the places of covered entities, and then sorting those materials. Also covered is compost facilities. Now, let's not confuse ourselves, because curbside composting or business composting, that service is not covered under EPR. But if we have a composter who, say, wants to start collecting covered compostable materials, they could receive funding under producer responsibility. Or maybe there's a composter who already collects those items and they need a little bit of help reducing contamination. They could receive funding under producer responsibility. So it's the actual compost facilities that have an opportunity to receive funding. And then finally, we have responsible end markets. And what that is a safe and responsible or environmentally sound way of ensuring that all the things we put in the recycling bin get turned into something new. Expected impacts increases access and creates an effective and cost-efficient system. So that's again the overview of how it works. Back in August, so just last month, that advisory board recommended to CDPHE that they approve the program plan that we submitted. So I think one of my colleagues can probably post a link to the chat to that amended program plan, because where that leaves us now. So public comment, CDPHE, the regulator, currently has public comment open. It's open through about the middle of September. And then they have the full 120 days, so somewhere into mid-December, to approve or reject Circular Action Alliance's plan. We, of course, hope they approve it in mid-December, after which we would have 6 months to begin implementation following that plan approval. If we look back in time, a couple of things that aren't on this timeline, but I think are important to understanding how we got where we are today. Back in 2023, Circular Action Alliance did a needs assessment, and this was on everything, the entire recycling system. It also included education and outreach, because we really needed to understand what was being done today in Colorado in terms of education and outreach, or E&O, you might hear me call it. And then late in 2024, we did consultation sessions, one of which was on education and outreach. And the feedback submitted and that we uncovered during those 2 years is really what informed the development of the program plan. It's how we got where we are today. So of course, after the reviews, after the revisions, and then we have that draft into CDPHE, know that much of that has come from engaged local governments and recycling collectors and nonprofits and all the great people doing great work in our state already. But we're excited because today there's going to be a little bit more opportunity for your feedback. So now we're going to get into what you came here for, which is education and outreach. So I'm going to talk big picture. So we're going to ground ourselves again in education and outreach. We are going for behavior change. So education and outreach is a primary lever that we can use to influence and increase recycling and composting and reuse and refill activities. Other pieces of education and outreach under the program plan also include reducing contamination, enhancing confidence, right? Because people need to be confident in our recycling system if they're going to use it. And then also reducing litter as part of that. But again, cannot emphasize enough that we are changing behavior, and that education and outreach is a tool to reach those recycling rates. Because under the program plan, we're going to more than double our current collection rate of paper and packaging by 2035. So when we look in the program plan, Chapter 8 is what really details education and outreach, our overall approach. And what you'll see is that our approach is broken into kind of 4 components or 4 levels. So we have a statewide level. That's our comprehensive statewide campaign that we at CAA are going to conduct, of course, using contractors. And then below that, but in addition to that, as another layer, we have community-led education and outreach. And that's what we're hoping that all of you on this call want to engage in, because what we'll be doing is providing funding directly to communities to provide that customized, individualized community level education outreach. We also have what's called household or covered entity level education and outreach. And what this is that the recycling collector talks directly to their customers about what's recyclable. And the unique thing about that is that the costs don't come out of the education and outreach budget, which is great because it actually means our education and outreach budget is a little bit higher than what you see on the screen here. I'll talk about that in a second. And then finally, we have data-driven projects. So when we see that there's a gap, data-driven won't happen in 2026, but come 2027, maybe there's a neighborhood where there's a language barrier. Maybe there's a community that has a high seasonal or rotating population, right? A resort type community. If we see gaps in recycling collection, we're going to use these targeted data-driven projects to help us reach our goals. And again, when we look at that annual budget, this is outlined in the program plan, it ranges from 14 million in 2026 to more than 20 million by 2030. And that figure includes the state level, the community level, and the data-driven education outreach. So again, if we add that household level that the haulers are conducting, our education budget is actually a little bit bigger than this, which is exciting because it means we have the ability to influence real change. So next, what I'm going to start to talk about is what are the types of activities that each of these levels of education and outreach are comprised of. So we don't want to duplicate across state and community. We want to complement, because that's what's going to make us most effective when we're all using the same messages and these same ideas to influence change. So at the statewide level, we're going to be focused on what can you recycle? How do you participate? And yes, a big piece of this is going to be statewide paid media. Another big piece of this is ensuring that we and all our service providers have customizable messaging and other resources so that you can effectively communicate to your audiences. Another example, we will be, of course, publishing a list of participating collectors for residents, right? Because residents who live in those open market communities where they need to call up a hauler, they need to know which ones are participating in EPR. So that's another example of the types of statewide activities that we will lead at CAA. This is a lot of words. So I will let you know now that you will be provided with a follow-up survey. We got to this point of community-led activities thanks to all your great feedback. And what we want to know now, it's like, is there anything else we're missing? So when we get to the end of the presentation, there will be a QR code so you can get to that survey and really look at the full list of what are these activities that you as a community can receive payments for to conduct. It's not a do all these things list. It's a, we want to make sure that the payments that we provide communities can be used on the activities that affect change. So if you are doing something in your community that isn't on this list, that you're like, wow, when we do this education activity, it really helps change. We see a bump, we see a noticeable reaction. We want to know about it. So make sure you fill out that survey. That link will come at the end. But again, these are examples of those activities that communities could conduct using the payments from Circular Action Alliance. When we talk about eligibility to conduct those community level activities, it's incorporated municipalities and it's counties for their unincorporated residents. Federally recognized tribes are also eligible. So for the local governments on this call who want to receive payment to conduct community level education activities, please plan to respond to the local government request for reimbursement. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in that whole process. Know that for tribes, we will be working individually with tribes on education payments, just because they have a different process for opting in as outlined in the legislation. What's important to note? So everyone in Colorado manages waste a little bit differently, and that is okay. Local governments are eligible for education funding no matter how you manage waste. So I've put this into 3 categories, but I'm going to talk about it more as in 2, right? We have what I like to consider organized collection. So that's local governments who are running trucks, they pay drivers, they come to your house and pick up recycling, right? That's the local government collection. We also have local governments out there who are contracting with a single hauler to pick up recycling from their single family residents. So those 2 types of organized collection, you can absolutely enter into a service agreement with Circular Action Alliance for those community level education activities, right? That list we just looked at. In addition to that, those communities are probably going to have a collection service agreement so you can be reimbursed for the costs of collecting recycling. And within that collection service agreement, there will be funding to do that household level education. For the open market community, so for those of you who rely on private businesses, right? So customers or residents call up an individual hauler and say, hey, bring recycling to my house. Those types of jurisdictions can also enter into service agreements for community level education and those activities we just looked at. Know that in those open market communities, the haulers are going to be the ones that would have the collection service agreements and the household level education. So again, I think the point here is that it doesn't matter how you manage waste, there is opportunity for education funding. So show me the money. That's what you want to know. We're getting there. So the reimbursement approach, whether it's for collection or E&O, it all falls under this 3-step process. Number 1 is the request for reimbursement. that is, it's a simple, think about it as a simple form. So like 10 to 20-minute form, it'll open later this year. That is your way to raise your hand and say, I want to participate. The second step then is when we get into the details, right? How many households do you serve and what type of education outreach activities might you conduct? That's all the details that are in step 2 or qualification. And then finally, the service agreement, that's when we all sign on the dotted line. So that's when we have what you can think of as a contract in place. And no matter what these service agreements are for, they will all, well, like Morgan said, it's proposed, right? The idea is that they all follow the same sort of approach, and that is a master service agreement. And then underneath the master service agreement, there will be separate statements of work. So if you're an open market community, maybe you only have a statement of work for education and outreach, or maybe you operate a drop-off center and you have 2 statements of work. For the jurisdictions that offer collection, you may have multiple statements of work, but the idea and the process and the approach, again, is the same. So this is our timeline and what we're focusing on today. So and you may have seen this slide presented at another webinar, and I think the idea is that there's multiple requests for reimbursement processes, but the one that we are focused on is that local government process, right? Because that's how you're going to get and raise your hand and say, I want the funding for education and outreach. So that request for reimbursement process will open late this year. We'll get into the qualification or the details in the first half of 26, after which then contracting will begin. And we would love to see reimbursements on the street for education outreach and other items by the second half of 2026. So for payments, I was really hoping to have that dollar per household payment for you today, but unfortunately I do not, because we still do not have the details of the request for reimbursement itself. So do know that when we release the request for reimbursement, we will have a lot more information that will include what is the dollar per household payment, because what education payments are going to look like is that we will name a price, so a dollar per household amount that we will multiply by the number of households in any given jurisdiction, and that will be the education payment. Now, we do anticipate flat rate payments for the smallest jurisdictions, because let's say you have 100 households in your community, the payment needs to be sufficient enough to be able to do some type of education work. Whereas the largest jurisdictions will see a graduated rate, because we would assume at scale to see some efficiencies. So again, know that details will be published when the requests for reimbursements are published late this year. And then that brings us to resources and tools. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide, because one of the questions we get a lot is from nonprofits. We already talked through eligibility. Nonprofits are not eligible to complete the local government request for reimbursement. However, if you are a government that works closely with a nonprofit, do know that you can subcontract education and outreach activities. So let's say you're a local government and you go through the process and you get your education payment, you can use that to hire a local nonprofit or some subcontractor to help you complete those activities. Another approach that you can take is if you are in a smaller community or even a larger one, and you find that you're often working together with other local jurisdictions, you all can partner on a service agreement. So what that might look like for education is, let's say you have 5 towns and a county who all want to work together. Each of you would complete your local government RFR, and you would say, I want Smithtown to be the lead. We're going to do a joint service agreement. And yes, there will be some sort of intergovernmental agreement or something that we would need to see for proof of that. But ultimately, then Smithtown as the lead would conduct all the education and outreach for those communities, those 5 towns in that one county. They would collect the full payment amount for all those jurisdictions, and then they would be responsible for all the reporting. So there's a lot of different approaches that you can take, whether that's hiring someone else or subcontracting for those E&O activities, or potentially partnering with other jurisdictions. And then finally, if you're like, you know what, I don't have the staff to do this, I can't make it happen, or for the local governments who don't respond, Circular Action Alliance will provide that community level education outreach. And we will do that by contracting with a third party. Because again, all these different layers, the state layer, the community level, the household level, each one of these levels of education is so important to reach our overall targets. So whatever approach that you take, you will have access to customizable resources. And again, this is a thing that we've reached out on in the past. And now that we feel like we have a really good list, we want your input on that. So this will be another question coming in the survey, is just to make sure we have what you need. You know, right now we're thinking about mailers and bill inserts and other materials to do direct outreach. It could be multifamily signage. So these are some of the resources that we are looking to have in an online portal that any local government or their contractor could log into and make adjustments to, and then use to conduct their community level activities. All right, so then reporting. So like I said, for the communities that enter into service agreements with us, there will be a level of reporting that they need to conduct, or that they need to communicate to Circular Action Alliance. They need to you're going to need to tell us what you did, right? What are the activities you conducted? And then based on those activities, the metrics may vary. So it could be households reached, it could be events attended, it could be, you know, school presentations completed or classrooms, you know, taught. And then we'll also need pictures or other samples of the work that you've conducted. And the reason for that is that Circular Action Alliance is required to report annually on the effectiveness of state level, community, household, and data-driven E&O. So again, if we go back to those 4 layers, we need to be able to say, here's what worked, here's what didn't. And communities reporting on the activities they conducted are a big part of that. So again, more details to come as we release the request for reimbursement process. And then finally, so the QR code on the left to give us your feedback, I hope you will scan that. We'll put a link in the chat as well. We would love for you to fill that out and let us know what you're thinking. That will stay open through September 19th. So as Morgan mentioned, we are going to post a recording of this, and we'll email you the slides. Anyone who's registered will get a follow-up email. It is going to take us a few days to post the recording, but you can fill out that survey whenever you're ready. And then the second piece that we hope you will attend is a webinar on October 9th. And what we're going to do at that session is we've partnered with an agency who's looked through a lot of the existing research on education, recycling education in Colorado. So we've taken that, we've done some additional research, and then using that information, we've started to make progress on our creative approach. And we would love to share that progress with all of you and get your feedback. So again, that's what's going to happen at the October 9 webinar. We'll make sure those links are posted in the chat. And finally, when we get to Q&A, we're gonna kind of collect questions into what's relevant for the entire group. But if you have a super nuanced question or something really specific, or if you just want your team to meet with Circular Action Alliance, we would be happy to do that. So go ahead and email us at coloradoinfo@circularaction.org, and that's how we can connect on a more one-on-one level. So I'm going to leave this up here for just a second. Let me see if I can go back. And I think we're going to head on off to Q&A here pretty soon.
Yeah, we got a few questions rolling in. Just as a reminder, on the toolbar at the bottom, if you open up the Q&A feature, we only have 5 questions. So feel free to start populating them based on Rachel's presentation. But just to give